Gardening is a great activity, I think, for everyone. But for new gardeners, it can be a challenge because there's just so much to know. Join me today as I share with you 12 things that new gardeners shouldn't do. Hi, I'm Gardener Scott, and you'll see a lot of advice out there about the things that you should do in your garden. But I recognize that every garden is unique, and so what I might tell you you should do might not match with your climate, with your location, and with your specific gardening desires. But there are some things that I think are universal, that gardeners should try to avoid if they want the best gardening success. And that's what this video is about. 12 things that you should think about as you approach your gardening journey. And I'll even include a bonus tip at the end. To begin, don't ignore the importance of soil. Good soil is key to gardening success. If you ignore your soil, you're going to have problems. Poor soil will lead to poor results. If you focus on your soil, if you think about your soil as a living part of your garden, then your plants will do better as well. This is the most important aspect of gardening. Colorado State University suggests that more than 80% of the problems that we have in our garden can be attributed to the soil. Focus on your soil, and your garden will do better. Don't start too big. I have a big space, a lot of garden beds, and I've been spending 3 years to get to this point. And that's after accumulating decades of knowledge to be able to do it this big. Starting big when you're just beginning really isn't the best way to approach gardening. Start small. Start simply. Maybe with just one bed or a few containers. And then as you grow plants in that small setting, you'll begin to learn the lessons and get that information you need to eventually get to a big garden. That greenhouse, well, I gardened for more than 30 years before I got my first greenhouse. You don't need to get all the big fancy tools and greenhouses in the beginning. Just start small. Don't overwater your plants. That's the one thing that almost all gardeners do. We baby our plants and we think that they need water. And if they need water, well, we'll give them some more water just to be safe. But in most cases, that's the opposite of what you should be doing. The soil just needs to be evenly moist for the plants to thrive. Not saturated, not dry, just moist. And all you need to do is just take your finger and just stick it into the soil to see how moist it is. If the soil is wet, you don't need to water anymore. Hold back on the water. Only water when the plants need it, and they'll love you for it. And don't over-fertilize your plants either. If you focus on your soil and do lots of amending with organic matter like compost, you may not need fertilizer at all. But if you haven't taken the effort to get your soil to where it's nice and healthy, fertilizers could be beneficial. But you have to know what nutrients your soil is lacking before you just blatantly apply whatever fertilizer you have. A soil test is a great idea because too often when we apply the fertilizer, it's too much. Too much nitrogen will give your plants good green growth, but it also means you probably won't get any of those tomatoes that you want because the plant's growing so big. Or maybe you won't get any of those carrots or beets that you want because none of the energy is going to the roots. It's all going to the plant. Be careful how you fertilize. And don't apply a pesticide just because you see a bug in the garden. The bad bugs are a surprisingly small percentage of the insects that you see. Beneficial insects are a surprisingly high percentage of the insects you see. So just because you see a bug and you think you need to kill it, it's probably not the best approach to gardening. Learn about the insects you have and recognize that by attracting a lot of those beneficial insects, they're going to naturally deal with the bad bugs. You probably don't need to apply many pesticides at all. And definitely, in the beginning, don't think that that's a magic fix just because there's bugs on your plants. Don't ignore the shade in your garden. Most gardeners learn very early that you should place your beds where they get full sun. But too often, we don't learn the lesson about shade until after we've been gardening for a number of years. My shed casts shade beginning in early afternoon. And so while if I stand out at noon and try to figure out where my beds should go, I can pick a spot that gets full sun, that bed may also be impacted by trees or structures, and they'll cast shade that could impact the bed that I chose so carefully to be in the sun. Don't underestimate the importance of your last frost date. The last frost date in spring may be the most important date on your gardening calendar. That's the date that will determine when you start most of your seeds for a summer garden. That's the date that we use when we start seeds indoors to grow the plants that go in the garden. And that's also a date we use in determining when we put seeds outside in our garden. That's the date that for many of us really defines the beginning of our growing season. So learn your last frost date and use it for your garden planning, and you'll probably have more success. Learn about the proper spacing of seeds and plants that you put into your beds, and don't overcrowd your plants. This is a very common tendency, even for those of us that have been gardening for a long time, and that's just to try to grow too much in a single bed. And when you have too many plants, well, they challenge each other. They fight each other for the nutrients and the water and the sun. And in most cases, there isn't a winner. All of the plants suffer. Learn about thinning your plants so that if you do put the seeds in closer than they should be, or the plants start growing to the point that they are too close together, it's okay to pull out some of those plants so that the strongest plants not only survive, but thrive. And this also ties into another issue. Learn about the mature size of plants. Don't think that that initial spacing that you put the plants in is going to be adequate in the end. You've got to learn about how big plants grow, because those big plants can shade out and overcrowd and overcompete a lot of the smaller plants. So don't overcrowd your plants, and don't fail to learn about how big they're going to grow in the first place. Don't plant at the wrong time of year. Most plants have a proper time when they should go into the garden. And don't expect that the nurseries and garden centers are going to help you out with that. It's just like Christmas or Thanksgiving or Halloween or Valentine's Day. The stores are going to start selling the products long before the time actually arrives. And that's particularly true with plants. It happens every year here in Colorado. The plants are available for sale, and new gardeners buy them and put them out on nice, warm, sunny days. And then we get a frost or a freeze or a snow, and all those plants suffer. So learn about your specific area, and again, the last frost date, the time when we should be putting the plants out. And also learn about the plants, because some of our plants, like lettuce and spinach, don't do well in the heat of summer. They're best suited for those cooler times. Different plants have different needs, and you need to figure out when's the best time to put them in the garden. Don't ignore the weeds in your garden. Weeds can quickly overtake a bed that has all that good soil and that's being cared for. One of the best ways to deal with weeds is mulch. I mulch my vegetable beds, my flower beds, And my little mini orchard here has 6 inches of wood chip mulch. I don't have any problems with weeds in this area. With the dried grass and the crushed leaves and the straw that I use on my vegetable beds, I have very little problem with weeds, but occasionally they sprout. As soon as I see a weed sprout, I pull it. You have to stay on top of the weeds, because if you're not pulling weeds every time you see them, you may end up with a garden bed filled with weeds and not even be able to identify the plants that you're trying to intentionally grow. Don't pay attention to the old wives' tales about gardening, and don't mix up some of those homemade remedies for all the ailments in the garden. Too often, somebody has an idea, uses it, thinks it works, posts it on the internet, and everybody starts doing it. Well, you may actually be causing more harm than good with some of those home remedies. Instead, learn about gardening. Go to gardening classes, talk to master gardeners, ask your questions to knowledgeable, experienced gardeners, and learn the science behind all of the gardening that you want to do. Take a look at the research-based evidence when it comes to soil and plants and what we're doing in our garden. If you start off by doing it right with that research-based information, you can avoid some problems that you don't even know were caused by that remedy that Uncle Frank told you to try. You can see that there's a lot that we shouldn't be doing in the garden, but there's also a lot that we should be doing in the garden. And that leads to my bonus tip. You should plan. You should plan as much of your garden as possible. Plan what seeds you're going to get. Plan when to start those seeds. Plan when the plant goes in the ground and when you're going to harvest. If you start your season with a plan in place, all of the activities during that season will probably be easier because you just follow your plan. Too often, new gardeners will go to the store and see a seed package, buy it, go to the garden, stick it in the ground, and really be unsure of what to expect, not even knowing how the plant's going to grow, how big it's going to get, or when to harvest. There's a lot of failure when you approach gardening that way, but when you plan your activities, you can expect a lot of success. I'm Gardener Scott. Enjoy gardening.